everyone, and welcome to Sing with Your True Voice podcast. I am a music teacher at Forest Area Community Schools. My name is Audrey Bearden, and this podcast has its very first episode ever. And today that's going to be on Understanding Voice Change, Part 1. This podcast was inspired, actually, by an article I read in one of my union magazines, believe it or not, and how podcasts can be used in education. And so today, for my students, we are doing just that. So we're going to talk about voice change today, and the goal, hopefully, is to give my students and anyone else the knowledge of, simply our larynx and our vocal folds and kind of what happens during puberty and when our voice settles and all the things. So when we have a hard day singing, it's not entirely our fault. It's just kind of our makeup, our anatomy, and we're going to talk about that today. So let's get started. So it's no secret that our voices change with age, right? That comes with growing up. It also comes with growing old. But for today, we're going to talk about the young singer. So we're going to discuss the things that can happen with the adolescent voice and kind of how we might navigate those in choir or as a solo singer or whatever it is you do. Even if you sing in the shower, you might wonder, why does my voice do this? So to all my students, I know that you know that your voice has gone through a big change and is still changing, or at least I hope you understand that it's still changing. Your voice will not settle until about your early 20s, okay? And there's a reason for that. So, as singers, I find that it is very important for you and for me and for anyone else to understand our body and how it works. This includes your voice, okay? And let me ask you this question. Have you ever heard of vocal folds? Or maybe vocal cords is another way that you may have heard that. Or have you heard of your larynx? These are all important to know, and today we're going to discuss kind of their purpose and what they do. So let's start with the larynx, okay? Larynx is a secondary organ, believe it or not. So we have our vital organs, typically like our heart, for example. We kind of need that in order to live, right? But it is important for us as developing singers to understand this secondary organ called the larynx. So it is located in your throat. It's below your tongue, right? If you were to put your hand on your throat, you could feel it vibrate, and that's like the location of your larynx there, okay? If you haven't seen what one looks like, fair warning, it looks a little funny, okay? You might think of what it might be similar to. Don't let that alarm you, it's just the larynx, okay? Human body looks weird in many places, especially in the inside where we're not used to seeing things in our anatomy. So I encourage you to go maybe look up a diagram or some sort of drawing of that organ. Okay. This is a part of, clinical studies and just kind of our overall anatomy and physiology. It's not weird, it's a part of who we are. Okay. So let me just put that out there for you singers. Okay. Especially you younger people. Youngers, I don't know what that was. But anyway, there are diagrams. Go ahead and look at that. And the larynx holds what we call your vocal folds, okay? It is about the size of a walnut. So if you know what a walnut looks like, it's not very big, okay? And this is a part of your respiratory system. That's very important to know. Your larynx is a part of your respiratory system. It has four important things that it does. Number one, if you all know, if you've ever swallowed something the wrong way, or maybe you've vomited before, you've been sick, this larynx prevents foreign material from going into your lungs. Okay, again, part of respiratory system. So that's a neat thing that it does, and we're glad that it does that, right? Here's an obvious one. It produces the voice. Okay, the larynx produces the voice. 3, it serves as part of our breathing tract. Again, if it's preventing things from going in the lungs, you would think it would have something to do with that if we're talking respiratory. And then also, lastly, it stabilizes pressure within our chest. especially when we're doing things that are strenuous, like lifting maybe heavy boxes or weights at the gym. That's another purpose of the larynx. So the larynx is very, very important in our body, and it's funny to think that it would be considered a secondary organ, um, because I feel like those things are very important for us to live as well, right? So maybe, I mean, talking and singing are nice. I was sure we could live without those, but I like the idea that I don't know, is part of our respiratory system. I don't want things going into my lungs. You know, I don't even know what it would be like if it couldn't stabilize pressure. We wouldn't be able to live if something weird happened, especially when lifting heavy things. But that's a whole thing that we can get sidetracked with. But good, larynx. It's in your throat, has a lot of purposes, but also connects with this idea of singing and speech. And we're going to talk about the vocal folds, okay? And another takeaway with this is that it's small. It's only the size of a walnut, okay? So let's go ahead and talk about vocal folds then. Um, in the larynx, we have a bunch of cartilage and muscles. And we also have those vocal folds. Vocal folds are kind of like these muscles. They got like this mucus lining, and um, which were formerly called vocal cords, which I'll explain in a second, and they vibrate. Okay. And if you've ever played a woodwind instrument or you know what that's like, you have a reed typically on your mouthpiece. And that's the type of woodwind instrument I'm talking about today. So, like a clarinet or saxophone, and maybe even like your double reed instruments like the oboe or the bassoon. You have that reed, you have to be able to get it wet, whether it be you put it in your mouth for a few or you stick it in water, right? Similar to our vocal folds, they have that mucus lining and they kind of resemble how the reed vibrates when you blow air into like the mouthpiece. So there was a demonstration done with a dog larynx, and this guy blew into the larynx. Okay, maybe it's a little weird, but he did do that, and it did produce a tone because you have those vocal folds. And I'll explain why I say that. Um, Vocal folds in there, and when you blow air, it vibrates similar to a reed. And because we have more advanced technology to kind of look inside the larynx and see those vocal folds, we changed the name to vocal folds because of how it resembles that lovely woodwind reed. Okay. They used to think before that they were similar to strings, which is why you had the term vocal cords. Now, they thought they were like strings, kind of like a violin, and they thought they vibrated in that way. Um, but honestly, it made more sense for it to be like a reed because they vibrate, but they also do like this kind of ripple effect, and that gives us a better idea of how they actually function. So they decided that chords was not an accurate enough description, and that folds would be better, and it's now the official clinical term for uh, our vocal folds there. So vocal folds is the term you use. And if you read any books based on that, they probably will use vocal folds. You might find some that say vocal cords. Um, I don't know the timing on that, but just know it's called vocal folds. So why does this matter? Well, thing is, I can't feel your voice for you. You have to do that. You gotta understand where it sits. Again, if you put your hand in your throat and you go, ah, you feel that vibration happening, and that sensation there, where your larynx is located. So, phonation happens, air passes through your vocal folds. Your vocal folds are vibrating, so they're opening and closing. And so you have that sensation. And that should be really easy to feel and understand for yourself, right? So I encourage you to try that and kind of just like experience that for just a second. It's also important to know the context of vocal change. So now that I've kind of explained to you what the larynx is a little bit and kind of what the vocal folds are and a little bit of what they do, we're going to talk about the actual vocal change that happens. And a little bit more about vocal folds in the context of how small they are, but also how rapid they can change. So, vocal folds can grow when you go through puberty. So, we're going to talk about the context of pre puberty into puberty. So, around your middle school age, right? When puberty begins. So, the female vocal folds can be anywhere from 9 to 13 millimeters. So, if you want to look at a ruler and see how big millimeters are, they're not very big, right? So that's about how long they are. And to give you a visual with that, you could think of the width. So when you're holding a wooden pencil, that's about how long they are, which is really, really weird to think about. They're tiny little uh, folds in there that kind of just do their thing. So they're really small. Um, for the male focal folds, your range about 15 to 22 millimeters. That's definitely bigger than the female, right? And again, that's just how it is for our anatomy. And in comparison, we've talked about, or I guess let's say, gentlemen, you have an Adam's apple. Usually, when you go through puberty, you develop this Adam's apple. Um, this becomes pronounced through vocal change. So, this happens throughout puberty because your larynx is enlarged and also your thyroid cartilage enlarges significantly, creating the Adam's apple. That also is another indicator of kind of where your larynx is, but also shows kind of the growth that can happen. Again, it doesn't change the size of your larynx. Your larynx, well, I said it can be enlarged, but it's still about the size of a walnut. It doesn't really change that much. So it's very important to understand that your larynx goes through those changes for you as a developing singer because your voice or your vocal alignment is off. So give yourself some grace. You're going to have to navigate through those changes for those of you who are singing as middle schoolers and into high school and even into early college if you decide to continue singing. Um, that's why you experience things like voice cracks, or maybe your range is all weird and you only have parts of your voice that you can use. And this is usually more obvious with males versus females, but it can happen with both for sure. Okay, so just have that understanding. Students, your larynx is going to continue to move and function throughout development. Okay, that's another thing to understand. Your voice is going to develop through ages about 13 through 17. That's usually like the more major changes that happen. Your voice won't settle until about your early 20s. I'm pretty much past that point. I am a young teacher, so I can tell you that yeah, I am I'm kind of leaving my early 20s now, and my voice is settled and it's not changing like it was when I was in high school. And I can tell you that from personal experience. And you'll get there and go through this development together in choral class, choir class, however you want to put it. Or if you're, at home singing, you're going to feel kind of the weird changes. You're going to realize you have good and bad days with your voice. Reason for this is because your muscles in your larynx will become weak. That's why you might lose some of that vocal agility. Um, because what's happening is your vocal folds are thickening. And they're thickening and they're changing in size a little bit. And this will affect your singing. And again, not your fault if you have an off day and you're like, I can't sing this today, Mrs. Bearden, what is going on? So, going through that development, you got weak muscles. So vocal health is very important too, okay? So let me put this in perspective to you and how much our vocal folds might change. So for the females, we experience about a 3 to 4 millimeter change, so they can grow that much more, which is about 34%, okay? So this gives you about a third of an octave downward, so you gain that much in your range. So your voice, in a way, kind of drops a little bit. Um, but then you also gain about 3 to 4 more pitches in your upper range. Again, this can vary. Again, that's why we also have voice classifications, and don't worry about that. But regardless, your voice changed. You're not going to sound like a little kid anymore. You're starting to develop and go through these awkward changes throughout your teenage years until you become an adult, essentially. So for guys, for males, you're going to experience about a centimeter, which is about 10 millimeters. Okay. That's a 64% change. That's bigger than what us females will go through. So what you're going to experience, which we all like to call your voice drops, you're going to get an octave. You're going to gain an octave downward. Gain an octave downward. You're definitely not going to sound like your child self that you did uh, either in your early middle school or in elementary days, right? You're going to have that octave downward and maybe a sixth upward as well, okay? And that's usually about what happens in the male voice. So this is why your voice is like freaking out. You just got this expanded range, but also your muscles are weak, your vocal folds have changed size and they're thicker than what they were. A lot of stuff's happening from pre-puberty into puberty, okay? So, and to put into context again, your those millimeters or even that 1 centimeter, they may not seem like much, especially if you looked at that ruler and were like, oh, that's not a lot. It's not like an inch, right? You know, it might not seem like much, but really, when it comes to singing, it is. And if you put it in the context that your larynx is about the size of a walnut, and you think about how much it grows from where it was, that can be pretty significant. And also just again, guys who get an octave downward, that's huge. That's like 8 notes. An octave is 8 notes, right? So you're getting all of that in your voice that you did not have before. So those tiny measurements are actually huge, and these are going to significantly impact your vocal function. So remember to be kind to yourself. You're gonna have off days. You're gonna have voice cracks. You're gonna be like, I used to be able to do this and now I can't. And why? Well, I just told you why. Okay? So when it comes to change, we're going to talk a little bit about phonation. So phonation, if you don't know what that means, is the production of speech sounds. Um, and that can become more difficult because of this reason. So remember how I told you your vocal folds are thickening. They also vibrate open and closed in that ripple effect. Um, but because those muscles are weak, they sometimes don't close all the way, creating a release of air or excess air in your larynx, and it gives you a different tone in your voice. And if you've ever had a really airy tone or more of a husky tone, it's usually because in the back where your vocal folds open and close, they're not fully closed all the way when they should be. And so the excess air kind of goes through. So that can be another thing that really affects, like, oh, what's going on? Um, and if you feel like you don't have a super full voice all the time. Similar thing, if you have laryngitis, which I've definitely experienced in my lifetime, your vocal folds are very, very swollen. And that will also affect your vocal alignment. You're going to lose a lot of control in that. And to give you a visual, think about two pillows. Two pillows smashed together. So those are your swollen vocal folds, and think about trying to zip those up. Like that's laryngitis for you, in terms of the anatomy kind of thing going on. So again, give yourself grace. Your voice is doing a lot of little things right now that make a huge impact. So, what does this mean for you? This means that trust your teacher, trust your vocal coach or your private teacher if you do voice lessons, whoever it is, with vocal warm-ups. Usually there's a reason why we teach you certain vocal warm-ups. And it's for a lot of things. And especially if we do things with range, we're trying to build that vocal agility again. We're also trying to work through, again, your vocal alignment and maybe try to build up those muscles again without hurting you. So it's very important that we as teachers, again, we do our job and we do our research and making sure that we're listening also to what's happening with your voice. And also, I check in, right? I always tell you if your voice hurts, maybe you shouldn't do what you're doing in that moment. If there's any tension, especially in your neck is actually going to affect how your larynx is sitting. Your larynx can raise and it can also lower in your throat. Okay. And we'll talk more about that. This is only part one because I don't want to overload everyone with information. Um, but we'll talk about that more about how your larynx again has a huge impact on everything, and especially when we talk about your body alignment. Um, some say posture, and I've been saying posture in class, I will say, but after doing some reading and some research, I may change that language. So your body alignment and how relaxed you are during class, okay, uh, can also affect your larynx. Um, Also, trust us when we say take care of your voice. That means drink water every day, okay? Don't slam water 20 minutes before a concert. It isn't going to do anything. And the reason being is water doesn't actually go onto your vocal folds. If you remember what I said about foreign material going into your lungs, remember that your larynx protects us from that. So if water went in there, you'd be drowning. Drinking water means that it affects your vital organs first, and then it goes to those secondary and other organs. They receive the benefits later. So do drink water. It's the best thing you can do, especially for your voice. And we'll again talk more about that. Um, and also, it's really easy to give up during voice change, okay? Because it can be very embarrassing or it can be a difficult experience. And I don't know what your experience was when you first started going through puberty. And I know many of you are young singers and it's your first time in choir. And I will do my best to make sure I'm using the right language with you all and giving you the resources you need. But you've also got to give, I guess, give your half of it and trying your best. Also giving yourself that grace again. And if you have a rough vocal day, cool, whatever, it happens. Okay? Doesn't hurt me all that much. And in fact, it makes me wonder more and more about the voice. And this is why I'm sharing this with you. Um, and just know your voice is your instrument, literally. I just told you where your vocal folds are and where your larynx is, and that's in phonation, and that's where it all happens. So if you don't take care of that and take care of your whole body, then it's going to affect it, and you're not going to have a great vocal day. And that can also affect your speech as well and how you're talking that day. If your voice sounds hoarse, that's usually going to tell me where you're going to be at singing wise as well. Walking out of this, when you're done listening to this, I hope that sharing this helps you understand a bit more about how the voice works and maybe your voice and where you're at in your development, um, and what it might be like going through each day, right? So if you have a moment in class thinking, like, I can't sing this, I can't reach those notes today, I, this is so hard to do, I feel like I can't sing anything ever, you know, or whatever it is, have a moment in class and think to yourself, my voice is still developing. I don't need to have this negative talk. If I need help, I can talk to somebody about it. And maybe I just need to take a break, drink some water, maybe do some lip trills, get the air flowing again, do whatever it is that you got to do to kind of reset yourself because your voice is going to be in and out of alignment and it's not always going to be 100%. So, and that's kind of the interesting thing through vocal development. And so many of us sing throughout our middle school and high school years. So kudos to you for sticking to it, and I really hope that you continue to. And also know there are other things I did not discuss, like hormones. Hormones can greatly affect your voice. They determine also important aspects of your voice, too, and which is in another podcast episode that we'll talk about. But understand vocal health is huge. And we've just touched a small part of it. And there's so much in our anatomy and physiology and the science and just kind of the research there is in vocal development and vocal health. So we're going to learn this together and it's going to be great. So this is the end of the podcast episode. And if you have any questions at any point, you can always reach out to me and I can try my best to clarify anything that may have been shared in this episode. Or if you have any questions or things that I should share on podcast for all of you, if you're curious about, let me know. Okay. Well, thank you for joining me today on part one of understanding voice change. And go do some homework. Go research, go look up what the larynx looks like and the vocal cords, and maybe that'll give you a better perspective on things. Just disclosure, it's not going to be to actual size. Remember, it's just a diagram, kind of blown up. Uh, and again, if you have any questions, let me know. Thanks, everyone, and happy singing.